All right. Well, I'm showing 12:02. We're a couple minutes past the hour now, so let's get going. First of all, thanks so much to all of you for joining us today. We're always conscious of your time and truly appreciate your time and attention to the work that we're doing here. For those who I haven't had the chance yet to meet, my name is Brian Flanagan. I'm the VP of Buildings at the Transition Accelerator and the Executive Director of the Building Decarbonization Alliance. Today's discussion is going to explore the important role that financing plays at reducing commercial building emissions. It's part of an ongoing webinar series that we're hosting, aiming at really provoking discussion and sharing knowledge from decarbonization experts in our amazing building sector. We do these every couple of months, so stay tuned on our social media feed and newsletter for upcoming events. Just a quick note on translation pour les francophones dans la pièce, malgré que le webinaire soit présenté en anglais. Vous pouvez toujours activer l'option en suivant les trois petits points dans le fond de l'écran, afficher les sous-titres situé en bas pour voir une transcription simultanée de l'événement aujourd'hui. Donc, merci pour votre patience ce sujet. I'd like, if I could, to take a moment to have people populate in the chat or in the comments where you're coming from. The Building Decarbonization Alliance has staff across many provinces, and so we acknowledge the many traditional territories of Indigenous peoples on which we work and live. I happen to be joining from Ottawa, the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. And one of the main reasons that I came to this area 25 years ago is because of the beautiful land that we get to enjoy here in the beautiful forest near the Gatineau Park. So again, if you, I would invite you to indicate where you're calling from. Just in terms of logistics real quick, we're going to be using the Q&A function for the session today. So please, if you have questions along the way, just pop your questions into the Q&A, and our moderators, John and Viola, will be paying attention. We're also going to be doing a few polling questions during the call to engage you on and capture some of your thoughts. So you can keep your eyes peeled for that popping up. We'll just give it a try now. We've got 2 polling questions right away. Those should pop up as a pop-up in your window, and you should be able to interact with those. All right. Great. So while we're waiting for responses on that, if you have any technical issues in the chat, you can reach to John, Perkis, and Viola Zhu, who are helping to moderate this session. So for those of you who may not be familiar to our work or new to us, the Building Decarbonization Alliance is a nonpartisan cross-sector coalition working ultimately to change the narrative on building heat. We're trying to inform and inspire industry and government leadership to really accelerate the market transformation. It's just so desperately needed. We see electrification as a credible, compelling, and capable pathway for building decarbonization. Now, electrification is not the only means of doing that, but it is key for this sector to contribute to a prosperous and competitive Canadian economy. So we're pretty laser focused on electrification as that primary pathway to decarbonization. Of course, this work can't be done alone. We stand on the shoulder of giants. We've got 250 industry partners that are part of this alliance of ours that we work with to troubleshoot the key issues in the space and to really take away barriers and to try to accelerate change, working with those partners in the ecosystem. More people are joining, people and organizations are joining every week. And if this is of interest to you, I would just strongly encourage you to consider joining us. You'll have more information about that at the end of the session. Well, let's go to the next slide. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to our Director of Policy, Matt Poirier, who's going to be leading today's session. Over to you, Matt.
Great, thanks, Brian. Yeah, so I wanted to welcome everyone today. So my name is Matt, Director of Policy here at the BDA. Pretty interested in the topic that we'll be covering today around financing. I've been working on some aspect of this for about 8 years now. Used to be with Dunsky before joining the BDA, helping to support different financing initiatives across the country, ranging from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Community Efficiency Financing Program, which is focused on residential retrofits. The Canada Infrastructure Bank's Building Retrofit Initiative, focused on commercial retrofits, and also just helping pace a little bit more like property assessed clean energy financing programs kind of across the country. For today's session, I'm going to do a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. Then I'll introduce our speakers, and we'll chat about their firsthand experience with building decarbonization. And then we'll have some time for questions from all of you. So I see there's already been a few in the Q&A, and thanks for flagging some items around the polling questions and whatnot. But please keep using that Q&A as we're chatting, and we'll make sure to try to respond to as many questions as we can today. So yeah, so just on a relatively quick intro into today's topic, want to take a quick look at how we've been doing on the building decarbonization front. So across the country, we've got about 10 million different residential type buildings, 15 to 16 million dwellings, depending on how you count that, and a little bit more than 500,000 commercial buildings. And as you can see here, just from a few stats from the federal government, direct building emissions, which is on the left, mostly coming from heating with fossil fuels for both space heating and water heating, have remained pretty steady over the past 20 years or so. You know, we've been able to get efficiency gains and reduce emissions on a per capita basis. And here we're showing on the right by kind of floor area, some drops in the commercial and residential sectors, commercial being about 10% and residential around 40%. But with the increase in inventory, which has been needed, and which some would potentially argue hasn't necessarily been growing fast enough, we've more or less kept total emissions stagnant, right? And indeed, you know, if we look forward a little bit, some projections, including those by the Canadian Climate Institute's 440 megatons, have us not meeting interim 2030 targets for the building sector specifically. When we're talking about building decarbonization, the building sector, it's pretty broad. So here at the BDA, we like to break things up a little bit. We usually do a split between kind of residential, commercial, and new and existing, because there's different challenges and opportunities kind of within each of those subsegments. For today's discussion, I just want to focus in on you know, we'll be talking mainly about commercial retrofits. And when we look at those, you know, the types of buildings that are impacted are office buildings, whether they be the really big and fancy ones in downtown Toronto, Class A, or smaller ones in smaller communities, so ranging them to C. We can talk about kind of retail buildings as well, small, medium, or large, multi-unit residential buildings, so condos or apartments. The MUSH sector, municipal buildings, universities, schools, and hospitals, and potentially even like the industrial sector as well. More or less kind of across the board at where we're at now, there have still been relatively few deep decarbonization retrofits for commercial buildings. So deep decarbonization being like a big reduction in emissions, operational emissions associated with those buildings. But the interest to act and to work together on this continues to grow, right? Generally, the view is that, you know, tackling this problem is going to lead to many opportunities, right? The decarbonization pie is going to be big enough for all the players to benefit once we can really start digging into it. So now where do we need to go with commercial building retrofits? And we'll you know, gather some thoughts on this, but to set the stage, you know, current retrofits, like I mentioned, are a few too few, and they're not necessarily going deep enough. A lot of them are still focusing on minor upgrades. Like every now and then we'll talk to someone who's still kind of walking through commercial buildings and touching light bulbs to make sure that they're high efficiency, right? So there's a lot of room for growth on that end. And to keep warming under 1.5 degrees, you know, organizations like the International Energy Agency have identified the need for an escalating path of deep, comprehensive retrofits. So hitting 20% of buildings by 2030, 50% by 2040, 85% by 2050. To do so, we'd be looking at, you know, a 3 times increase in current retrofit rates for the commercial sector, additional shift in the focus to doing deeper retrofits, so looking to eliminate combustion in many cases of fossil fuels, And though the estimated range varies quite a bit, somewhere around 6 billion in additional spending every single year for commercial institutional buildings alone. So I hope that's enough for me to set the stage here. What I really would like to get into is hearing from our speakers for today. So we've got two great speakers who are lined up, who essentially live and breathe commercial retrofit financing on the day-to-day. We've got Erin Ellis, who's been with Efficiency Capital for more than 3 years now and is serving as their Senior Director of Development. She's got a professional background that spans public policy, international trade, and commercial real estate, and is bringing over 15 years of cross-sectoral business development experience to Efficiency Capital's team. She thrives at conceptualizing, funding, and successfully delivering on programs and partnerships aimed at improving economic, social, and environmental goals. And we'll hear about a number of those today. And her passion and expertise are really helping to drive Efficiency Capital's ambitious market and segment expansion activities in their ongoing pursuit of a net zero future. We've also got James, who's joining us from BMO, where he's been for over 6 years now, and is currently in the role of Director of Sustainable Finance. Prior to that role, he was part of the Capital Markets Sustainable Finance team, where he helped grow sustainable finance products within the bank. This included launching BMO's high-profile Retrofits partnership with the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which we'll hear some more about today, supporting the acquisition and integration of Radical Group, which is a leader in helping organizations measure and reduce emissions, scoping early stage real estate decarbonization opportunities, and also publicly advocating for BMO's climate ambition through thought leadership. So I'll pass it on to our speakers to explain a bit more about how their organizations are supporting decarbonization upgrades in commercial buildings. And with that, Erin, I'll pass it over to you.
So much, Matt. So yeah, as Matt mentioned, just before we jump into discussion today, we're going to take some time, James and myself, to just quickly kind of walk through where we're coming from so that everybody's aware of our backgrounds and the organizations that we're working with. So Efficiency Capital is a developer, an investor, and an owner of energy efficiency and net zero projects in the built environment. That means we partner with building owners to reduce their energy and GHG consumption at a service level. So we use an energy as a service approach, not a traditional financing approach to reducing carbon emissions in these buildings. We were originally incubated by the Atmospheric Fund back in 2012. We spun out about 5 years after that as a private sector company, recognizing that in order to kind of meet the needs of the private sector, we needed to be a little bit more nimble and a little bit more flexible. And so we've been by ourselves now for about 8 years, but obviously still greatly supported by the Atmospheric Fund and other LC3s across Canada. We have the bulk of our funding at the moment comes from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. So we are a commercial building retrofit accelerator underneath their or aggregator, sorry, underneath their commercial building retrofit initiative. And so we have a significant amount of capital and high impact capital aimed at catalyzing retrofits in the built environment, specifically within the commercial real estate segment. Next slide. So a little bit about our process. So well, it's much more complicated than this, trying to keep it kind of to a 3-step sort of approach here. So our first step really, when we identify potential building for decarbonization, is we're going to work cross-functionally within that ownership group to better understand the key financial, operational, and sustainability goals for the building or the building portfolio. Once those goals are identified, step 2 is really conducting an investment grade energy audit of the building or buildings to determine the group or groups of measures that are going to enable us to achieve those established objectives. Once the costs and benefits of the various measures have been identified, then we're going to be able to present a commercial business case to the ownership group for final approval and final measure selection. So at that point in time, we've got a strong idea and some guarantees around the costs and benefits of various bundles of measures. Following that selection, step 3 for us is always going to be a detailed financial modeling process, which is going to allow the owners to have some guarantees in terms of the performance outcomes, both technical and financial of the project. And that financial modeling is then going to form the basis of our final financial agreement or investment agreement with the owners. I just realized the formatting is a little wonky on that slide, so sorry about that. Next slide, please. So ultimately, our model is really predicated on a platform that's going to facilitate collaboration and enable scalability. So we're bringing various sources of impact, or various sources, sorry, of impact capital and available market incentives to bear in a one-stop shop for owners across all asset classes. So this approach is much more flexible and much more reactive to changes in market conditions than traditional sort of funds would be in this space. And we're also offering the benefit of improved transparency between EC and the building owners as it relates to the sources and uses of funds within an individual project. Next slide. So that's going to allow us to kind of bring a few key value drivers to any projects that we may be working on. So the first being no upfront capital is required of the building owners. So you're able to preserve your core business capital for core business growth. As I just mentioned in the previous slide, we're providing that one-stop shop, so that single point of contact for all stakeholders. So the actual owner is focused on the communication with Efficiency Capital, not the communication with various engineers, other financiers, government incentive providers, so on and so forth. So it's much more turnkey. We also are product and service agnostic. So we're in a position where we're able to choose the best performing equipment and services and vertically integrate into the stacks that an individual owner may already have and the relationships that they already have. Unlike more kind of traditional ESCO models, which some folks on this webinar may be familiar with, we actually offer easy buyout options as well. And we provide performance guarantees for the long term. So we're essentially contracting for outputs, not inputs. You don't necessarily want the lighting fixture, you want light in your facility. So that's kind of that flips that sort of traditional model on its head a little bit, if you think about it that way. We are also an off-balance sheet solution, so we have no impact on leverage. And we're obviously doing everything through data-driven performance. So we're guaranteeing again and de-risking these solutions so that we're guaranteeing performance for the owners. And then last slide. And so just quickly, this is a brief table that sort of underscores the unique market value between, working with just an engineer or an ESCO or a traditional sort of financier versus working with an energy as a service company such as Efficiency Capital. So you can see that all of the risk is transferred onto Efficiency Capital underneath this model. Again, we are investing our own money in the project, so we've got skin in the game with you. We need to guarantee that performance because we're not getting paid without that performance coming to spec. And then, kind of finally, and more nuanced, other market structures are generally involving financing versus investment. We see ourselves as investors in your building, and we're there for the long term, getting repaid out of saving streams that are generated. And after that repayment is made in full, then all ownership of the assets transfers over to you. So that's it. High level, that's EC.
Thanks, Aaron. And James, you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Aaron, as well. So yeah, James Burrow, Director of Sustainable Finance at BMO. As you can see by this slide, BMO is a large Canadian bank, which I'm sure you all know. And look, I think we have a pretty meaningful commitment to sustainability and climate. And I would reiterate that we have that meaningful commitment to sustainability and climate in the post-Trump world as well. In fact, BMO's board of directors and executive committee reaffirmed basically all of our climate goals as recently as late November after that US election. So I guess one thing that I want to state up front is BMO remains very, very much committed to this, and our core targets are still very much in place post-Trump as well. So maybe if we can go on to the first slide. And yeah, I'm not necessarily going to talk through this slide in a ton of detail, but effectively what this is a mini term sheet for our CI related debt that we can offer. But let me almost step back from this a little bit and kind of maybe distinguish what we do from Efficiency Capital and explain why it kind of makes sense in the context of the bank. So I think, building off what Aaron spoke about, the ideal situation that you want to get a project sponsor or a borrower into is a situation where the energy savings pay for themselves. And in the context of a bank, that means that the energy savings generated by a project are greater than the debt expense that the client or the borrower or the project sponsor takes on to finance that project. And the structure that we look to do that with is basically phase one for the capital expenditures associated with the project itself. We will offer an interest-only construction loan, which finances, all of the retrofit project itself. Now, if we use CIB money to do that, that interest-only construction loan is at 2%, in contrast to what we would normally lend at, which even in today's market, where rates have come down significantly, would be kind of between 5 and 6%. So for clients that hit a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, they're going to get very, very cheap project debt to fund the cost of that retrofit. And the important thing about that project debt is it's interest only. So while the retrofit is happening, they're only ever actually paying the interest on the debt itself, not paying down the principal. So it's almost like you have a credit card and you just pay your monthly interest costs and don't actually pay down any of the balance on the credit card, which I wouldn't recommend doing. I wouldn't recommend anybody actually do, but in the construction context, it certainly makes sense for retrofits. So a key part of the attractiveness of that debt is the 2% rate, which is at least 4% lower than anything else you would get from other banks in the market. And I think another key attractive piece about that is we will fund up to 100% of eligible project costs. So normally when a bank finances a construction project, a large renovation or a retrofit, typically the bank would finance up to 80% of those costs and would require 20% equity in from the borrower. So on a $1 million project, the borrower would need to pay in $200,000 of their own equity and seek $800,000 of financing. Here, we would finance the entire thing. So I think that's the key features of the interest-only construction or retrofit project debt that we would advance. And the period that the client qualifies for this debt is the construction period of the retrofit project itself, up to 2 years, plus a 12-month stabilization or commissioning period, up to a maximum of 3 years. So I think that 3-year period gives you, more than enough room to complete even the most advanced and extensive retrofit projects. And then post-project, we would refinance that with a commercial mortgage. Why would we refinance that with a commercial mortgage? I think because that debt is obviously secured against the building. It amortizes or is paid off over a very, very long time, 25 to 35 years. So as you remember, in the first phase of the project, you're only paying interest on the costs of the project itself. Once the project is completed, you're obviously going to have to pay down those project costs at some point. But we think the best way to do that is via a commercial mortgage, because that debt is relatively cheap, because it's secured against the building and it's paid back over a long time. So, low interest rates paid back for over a long time, give the client the maximum, possible chance that they have to make sure that the energy savings, should they be there, are more than the cost of the debt that they're paying on the project. Look, I think that's all I would want to kind of highlight on that slide. If we flip to the next slide, I think there's a few kind of places where this works really well. Sorry, I was anticipating a different slide. Let me just touch on this one quickly. So in terms of eligible costs, we will finance any hard or soft cost that directly or indirectly reduces greenhouse gas emissions, conserves resources. So an example of a sort of direct hard cost would be replacement of gas furnaces with heat pumps, but we'll also fund some of the indirect costs of electrification or decarbonization, like electrical capacity upgrades, feasibility studies, GHG emissions footprinting and forecasting, and we'll even throw in kind of ancillary costs that still relate to decarbonization, like EV charging infrastructure. The stuff that we won't finance at the lower rate is in the instance where we're funding projects that aren't just simply energy efficiency or decarbonization retrofits. We're funding wider kind of renovations to buildings, anything that's kind of like aesthetic upgrades, interior finishes, et cetera, we wouldn't finance that at the lower rate because we cannot hand on heart say that drives the decarbonization. But anything that we can link back to the decarbonization of that building, we will look to finance at the lower rate. So if we go on to the next slide now, then I think where we are finding real success It's probably typically in larger projects, I'll be honest, at the moment, particularly where we're using the CIB debt. And particularly where extensive renovations are happening concurrently with retrofits. So both of the examples you see here are examples of that. So the Sunrise building in Edmonton was completed, or is a project being done by Avenue Living. We financed the decarbonization of that building, about 64% reduction in emissions. But that was happening at the same time as the building was kind of being revitalized to provide more rental housing to that particular area of Edmonton. The other project that I'm going to flag here, again, a deep decarbonization of a building, 67%. This was actually an office to residential conversion of a building in downtown Halifax from a largely vacant office into a multi-unit residential building that's got some really good pre-leasing and is showing really good signs of being fully occupied on completion. So why are we getting deeply involved in those projects where other stuff is happening at the same time? I think largely because that's the projects that we're seeing. A lot of our clients aren't necessarily saying like, hey, I'm just going to do a kind of deep retrofit of my building. They're thinking about it in the way, in terms of, I've got to do a bunch of stuff to my building anyway, and why don't I decarbonize it at the same time? Now, that's not to say that we won't do pure decarbonization related projects. In fact, the next couple that are coming down the pipeline for me, and we've got term sheets out on these projects right now, is a deep decarbonization of a hospital in Ontario focused purely on energy related measures, and a deep decarbonization of a manufacturing facility in Cobourg, Ontario as well. Both of those are what I would call pure play energy efficiency or decarbonization projects. And they're fairly deep retrofits and fairly significant overhauls. So, for us, we'll really play in any space where the client's looking to decarbonize the building. It is easiest where there's already a relationship between that client and BMO, where we already potentially have some debt on that building, so we're not sitting behind another bank. But we'll consider all project types. I think the one thing that I would leave off on, at risk of going on for too long here, is we are looking at solutions that don't include CIB debt as well. We know that the building retrofits program at CIB may not be around forever, and we know that we bank have a responsibility to kind of fully deploy as much of our own capital into this space as possible. In fact, the market is going to need it. It's going to need conventional financing as well as concessionary financing. So this year we're developing a few solutions, one of which touches on new construction, and one of which touches on retrofits that uses purely BMO financing. I've probably gone on for too long already there, so thank you for your patience. Matt, I will pass it back over to you to begin the kind of moderated section now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, James, for that overview as well. And we do have a few questions that have already come in, specific to some of the pieces that you both touched on. I think I'd like to start off with just kind of a general question for both of you about how busy you've been lately with some of this work. So you've both been kind of doing this job for a while, and so I'm partially curious in terms of like how you've seen the decarbonization market change since you started up your roles, and just like how things are going today. So a bit broad, but love some thoughts.
Matt, you're basically going to have to tell us who to start.
Yeah.
Sure. Erin, do you want to go first? Yeah, awesome.
I'll give you a break for a second, James. I'll happily go first here. Yeah, so for us at EC, I mean, how busy have we been? We've been consistently doubling our portfolio projects year over year since I joined the company, which was, about 3 years ago. So obviously, we're busy and we're continuing to see demand grow. I think when you ask, how is it how's the market changed a bit since I first joined? There was a lot of talk about transitioning to net zero in the commercial real estate sector when I first started out with Efficiency Capital, but I didn't see a lot of action really being taken beyond energy audits. Like everybody had energy audits, but nobody was really acting on them. I think what we're starting to see now is the industry realize that these energy reports kind of sitting on a shelf somewhere getting dusty translates to them losing out on more than just, reduced utility costs. It's them losing out on increased property values and rental premiums, reduced maintenance costs, and a reduction in the likelihood of critical failures. There's, avoided capital costs. There's enhanced access to project finance with, folks like James and BMO. And also a reduction in the risk of energy and carbon pricing inflation. And so I think, you know, all of those kind of monetary benefits combined are starting through, you know, the education of the Building Decarbonization Alliance and so many others in market are starting to form kind of the basis of more robust commercial business cases in this sector. And I think also beyond the monetary benefits, the industry is also really starting to recognize the non-monetary benefits of green buildings. So, I mean, that is, you know, the reduced carbon emissions, the improved tenant comfort and well-being, which translates oftentimes, you know, to reduced absenteeism or improved, you know, tenant retention, right, and attraction in these buildings, and the enhanced resilience, obviously, as well. Both resilience to adverse effects from energy supply as well as extreme weather events. All of that, these are discussions both in the policy space, but specifically in kind of commercial real estate space that I'm having on a much more regular basis than I was 3 years ago, for sure.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, I mean, I'd say the overall message is largely the same. Largely the same with us. I'll be totally honest, I didn't do as many deals last year as I wanted to do. We deployed about $30 million of CIB's money, about $85 million of our own, but I wanted to do more. What I saw last year, though, was we had a ton of conversations with clients, and I'm an impatient guy. Those conversations didn't move fast enough. They were getting the audits done. They were getting kind of internal alignment. But what I'm kind of seeing in early 2025, which is a nice problem to have, is all of those chickens are coming home to roost, if that's the right expression. All of those conversations where I was like, I don't know if these guys are serious about, you know, this or not. A lot of them have turned out to be pretty serious, and they're like, yeah, we want money for this now. We've done our audits, we've done the kind of pre-feasibility work, and we want money for this now. So look, that's a really exciting place to be doing lots of these projects again that are leading to kind of deep decarbonizations. You know, this isn't kind of 30% decarbonization involving LED lighting and a bit of insulation. It's electrification. It's really material decarbonizations of those buildings. So, you know, have been busy, getting busier, which is a good thing. In terms of what I'm seeing change in the market, I don't know if I'm seeing, you know, I would just say I'm seeing a continued growth in general, you know, momentum. I wouldn't say there have been, you know, drastic shifts one way or the other, or even in response to what's happening in the US. You know, I think that the larger institutional investors and platforms have spent a bunch of time up front investing in teams that understand the value of decarbonization and energy efficiency. You know, all the stuff that Erin was talking about, and now they're starting to just kind of grind projects out. And I'm starting to see a lot of smaller kind of one-off borrowers, or you know, borrowers who have one or two buildings begin to twig that, hey, a lot of these technologies are really coming down in cost, and these deals, you know, these retrofits are starting to pencil on their own merit now. So that they're beginning to twig to that. I don't think those factors will change. You know, technology will continue to come down in cost. So I've been quite relieved to see that despite the political churn and uncertainty, projects have been moving ahead. Borrowers are largely doing, you know, what they originally planned to do.
No, that's great. And I guess just building on that, the political uncertainty, you know, the consumer carbon pricing mechanism being rolled off, tariffs and whatnot. Are you seeing any kind of short term or immediate impacts in some of the discussions you're having on those, or kind of are people forging ahead with plans? Yes. James, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that a lot of our clients really believe carbon pricing was going to stick around anyway. So I don't know too many borrowers that actually anchored the entire business case of a retrofit based on carbon pricing. So, you know, in fact, a lot of them I know deliberately didn't, because they could see that the Trudeau government was running out of steam and didn't fully believe that they would exist past 2025. So, look, am I happy that carbon pricing is gone? Well, actually, I'm not going to comment on that because obviously the bank is completely neutral on things like that. But you can imagine what I would say to you in a bar when I wasn't, you know, when I'm not speaking in a formal bank context. But look, I'm glad to see, you know, the removal of carbon pricing has not really affected the volume of projects. Be interested to see what Erin has to say though.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'd add, like the tariffs and the geopolitical factors obviously have resulted in a push for more local procurement, both, you know, within our firm and our partners' firms, as well as, you know, from our clients, which ultimately is a good thing, right? Like ultimately we're all working for Canadian businesses here. We're in the Canadian commercial real estate sector. And so we want to see more of that local procurement. I think the only area that I see maybe more of a reprioritization of energy efficiency retrofits as a result of the tariffs is actually in the manufacturing segment, as they're looking to really reduce some of those bottom line business costs to maintain their profitability in the wake of potentially increased tariffs and on their exports. So that's really the only area that I would say I'm seeing a significant sort of difference there.
No, yeah, and that's great that they're it hasn't put the brakes to too many things. I guess in terms of opportunities or places where you're seeing a lot of movement, any specific sectors, like subsectors of the commercial building piece, or types of technologies that are moving ahead a bit faster than others? And maybe Aaron, I'll pass that to you first.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what James said, we're having conversations all the time, and we're kind of broadly across the commercial real estate sector, as well as, you know, affordable and social housing and others, right? So I don't know that I'm seeing anywhere picking up necessarily that much more rapidly. It's just the overall volume has definitely increased and the overall interest has definitely increased. I think the availability of new solutions and technologies right now for different climate zones, so big country, right? And we've got very different climate zones, as well as kind of the decrease in the price and increase in the expertise around those same sort of solutions makes some of them more, like makes the renewable and storage measures much more common features in deep energy retrofit projects that we're doing today than they were in the not so distant past. I think as well, you know, developing the business case for adopting many of those technologies is made much more compelling by investment tax credits and the copious amounts of utility rebates and other incentives that are aimed at really catalyzing their adoption. And so that is really helping to drive, you know, what those, and James has already mentioned this as well, you know, a lot of 30% reduction projects in, you know, 5 years ago, let's say. Now we're hitting 60, 70, 80, 90%, because those are the technologies that are really enabling that full transition to net zero in these buildings. And so, you know, the timing is really right for owners who are mission aligned towards that net zero objective, because these financial supports are currently available and the expertise in market generally and knowledge in market is generally increased. So it doesn't seem like you have to be the most progressive building owner, which, you know, isn't central or natural for commercial real estate necessarily, right? We kind of like to do things the way we've done them and stay safe and be a bit risk adverse. I think that increase in the technology and the kind of de-risked technologies aligned with those financial incentives that are available really help to push beyond that like for similar and move towards that full net zero transition.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a few bright spots, and there's also some clouds on the horizon. Maybe I'll start with the bright spots. I mean, the costs of key technologies, particularly solar and battery storage, and batteries, even when they're used alone, can be kind of incredibly effective for kind of arbitrage and, you know, storing electricity when you can buy it cheaply and then discharging it when you can't. Just the cost decreases in those technologies and the uptake of those technologies has really been stunning. Like sometimes when I'm on the train back from work, I kind of geek out by looking at some data from like Ember or the International Energy Agency. Like I'm a really interesting guy, as you can tell. And like, you know, and they compare the cost decreases in the uptake of solar and battery compared to kind of key energy transition technologies in the past. And it really, really is stunning. Particularly in certain markets, adoption in the United States, and markets that might surprise you as well, Texas, as well as California. And what we're seeing with some of our borrowers in Canada is they're installing that stuff, you know, solar particularly, wherever they can, wherever it makes financial sense across the portfolio, and doing it pretty quickly. So I think that's a real bright spot, and I think we can continue to expect those costs to continue to decrease, which obviously has, you know, great benefits in terms of decarbonization. What I am really looking for, hoping for, pinning some hope on is, you know, the costs of commercial heat pumps follow that cost curve that solar and batteries have. Because for me, really, you know, we can throw as many incentives and as much CIB money into this as we want. But when this will cease to become a problem and will just become, you know, what is happening will really become the energy transition is when heat pumps can virtually outcompete, you know, gas-fired furnaces and fossil fuel-based equipment. across the board. And I know they're there, you know, heat pumps are there in some places, in many places, but I'm not sure that heat pumps are there yet. So I'm really trying to pay close attention to the economics of heat pumps, because for me, that's the key technology in terms of, you know, decarbonization of real estate. So I think those are the bright spots. The clouds on the horizon for me do relate a little bit to tariffs, I'm going to be honest. I know that we don't build a lot of heat pumps, that we don't build a lot of solar panels, we don't build a lot of batteries in Canada. That means we've got to import them from places like either the United States or China, you know. And right now, I don't think Canada's appetite for decreasing tariffs on the United States or China is particularly high. So, you know, I don't know what administration is going to be in May, but I really do hope that, you know, certain low carbon technologies that help with energy efficiency, help reduce costs for borrowers, whether they care about the greenhouse gas emissions or not, you know, like heat pumps. I hope that they will be exempted from tariffs, or I hope that the impact of tariffs, you know, will find a route to minimizing those impacts. And as Aaron pointed out, that might involve onshoring, bringing the production of some of these things back to Canada. I know that makes time. So look, those are my bright spots. Those are some of the clouds on the horizon. That's kind of how I'm thinking about technology right now.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, Aaron touched on just kind of the owner side of things, or like your clients and how they're thinking about some of these benefits. Or James, I think you mentioned how momentum's building right now. We get a few thoughts from you, James, first, just on kind of how your clients are thinking about this, like the ones who are coming to you now. Is it more than just a financial play? Because, you know, some technologies aren't there yet, or yeah, what's their key considerations, and what are you seeing, if anything, changing there?
Yeah, for me, I'd say the clients of ours that tend to be most, you know, active in this space, and are thinking about it systematically are, you know, kind of investment platforms that hold real estate on the part of large institutional investors. So I flagged Avenue Living as an example of one of the projects that, you know, we're thinking about that we financed there. They're a really good example. You know, they've got a whole team that's looking at this, you know, kind of integrating the need to decarbonize along with regulation that they may be facing in different jurisdictions, the technology available, thinking about when buildings are coming up for kind of major capital upgrades anyway. They've kind of built out a team that is really sophisticated at just integrating all those factors and developing a capital plan to upgrade their entire portfolio over time. So I'm really excited about the work that they are doing. And I think they can form a great template for maybe some kind of smaller clients, smaller institutions who don't necessarily have, you know, the level of sophistication that Avenue Living have, don't have the resources that Avenue Living have, you know, to do that. So I think the template is there. I would also say that, you know, although it's not necessarily the majority of the market or even a large chunk of it, some of our borrowers really do, you know, put money behind just decarbonization for decarbonization's sake. It's easy to be very, very cynical and believe that nobody's going to do this unless the financial case alone makes outstanding sense. But I will say that some of our clients are paying a premium to decarbonize their buildings just because they believe in it, just because they think it's the right thing to do. Now, I'm not saying that they will incur massive financial losses to do that, because they'd be out of business, but they're willing to pay sort of 1% to 5% cost premiums for the sake of decarbonization alone. So it's not like, you know, all of our clients are purely, you know, purely capitalist, rational market actors who don't value the externalities associated with decarbonization alone. You know, yeah. One thing, you know, maybe this is going to touch on another question that I think you might ask, Matt, is how do we activate those less sophisticated or less carbon conscious, you know, real estate entities? That's a challenge. It's a challenge we're still grappling with as a bank. I think we have some ideas. We've got some stuff we're exploring, but that is a big challenge. How do you activate the kind of the mid-market, less sophisticated borrowers?
Aaron, any additional thoughts on that? Or
I mean, James did an excellent job on that one. I think really, you know, yeah, bringing the expertise and navigating the development of both the funding stack and the technical stack for it to make commercial sense. That's it, right? I already touched on this, but obviously worth mentioning again that, you know, I think looking at those monetary benefits as well as the non-monetary benefits, so, you know, some of the externalities that James was talking about too, associated with reduced carbon emissions and healthier indoor spaces and more resilient buildings, et cetera, is also something that, you know, we're starting to see more sophisticated clients starting to think about when they're considering kind of the benefits of retrofitting and how deep to go and when to go and so on and so forth. I guess a bit unlike James, I've seen a fair bit, and we sort of, shouldn't say specialized, but we've certainly got a lot of traction in the mid-market, but it does take a certain level of sophistication for that mid-market owner to actually move. But I personally love the mid-market because, just like James, very impatient person, and I want to see people move with projects quickly. And if you find the right mid-market player where, you know, the economics align and the building has, you know, end-of-life asset renewal needs, and you can also, you know, build in some resilience for them, they see the benefit of that, and they're much more flexible and much more nimble in making those decisions quickly and moving forward with the projects. Whereas if I'm talking to, you know, a large REIT, that's not necessarily going to be a decision that's moving quickly, because I'm trying to align, you know, ESG goals or sustainability goals within the organization to the financial targets, to the, you know, executive compensation, like all of the different operational silos, all of those different silos, you're trying to get them all together internally while being an external player. And that's not easy. And it's always a much slower process. And so, yeah, the mid-market for us has actually been, you know, a North Star actually in terms of driving towards building decarbonization, I'd say.
No, that's great. And I mean, it's becoming pretty clear that you're doing more than just like lending money, right? You're helping these building owners, your clients, along on their journey on this piece. Is there anything you want to maybe flag in terms of things that you are doing to help them along? Maybe it's, you know, understanding which type of energy audits to do, or manage that, like going through the investor tax credit process and helping them with that, or just anything along those lines that maybe isn't apparent when you think of, oh, someone's helping me with financing, they're just going to cut me a check for $800,000 and be good with it.
Yeah, to be honest, we say, you know, there's three areas that we're focused on. We've got capital, we've got capacity, and we've got scale. And so those are the three areas that we bring in, and we almost act as though we're an agent on behalf of that building owner, because we're seeing ourselves as investors, not necessarily financiers in this project. We're guaranteeing performance, and we need that equipment and that project to run, to generate the value streams that we're going to see our repayment come out of over the long term, whether that be 10, 15, 20 years. So yeah, I mean, we definitely are much more. I don't think I need to belabor that point. I'll maybe see what James has to say there too, but certainly more than just the money here.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I want BMO to go. I'll be totally honest. Like I right now, I think we would expect the clients to do most of the legwork, most of the stuff that, you know, Erin and her team at Efficiency Capital can kind of do. Look, and I think, you know, for more sophisticated clients who are doing it anyway or thinking about this anyway, that's fine. That's who we're working with right now. In terms of what the bank does to support clients around the kind of broader project, what I would say is, I have a certain degree of knowledge, and for, you know, large projects where it makes sense, I can kind of lean in with advice and connecting them to the right kind of companies and helping them think through pieces. But that's not going to be scalable in the long run, and I know that. Part of the challenge that we have is we will not turn the entire force of our kind of real estate lenders or mid-market lenders into energy efficiency experts. And much as I would like to, like, you know, they need to specialize in financing stuff, not in energy efficiency. So that's a limitation that we have to contend with. What we're quite interested in and are actively investigating right now, though, is kind of digital solutions that help do that first level of kind of energy audit for clients, you know, for free or potentially for a fee. So, you know, what that could look like in the bank context is, you know, we have data about a building's age, a building's size, a building's address, and a building's type. You know, we have that data. So if we're able to work with certain software providers, we can give them that data and then provide for our clients a digital report or a digital interface that says, hey, we're tracking these buildings in your portfolio. We're assuming this, and this, and we believe that actually for this building, if you do X, Y, and Z, and for that building, if you do A, B, and C, it will lead to a payback of, you know, 10 years, and you would finance it this way. So for us, you know, for me and for the bank, I'm really interested to see if we can get into the space of providing not even ASHRAE level 1 audit, nothing, you know, not even getting that far, but potentially just getting the client to the point where they understand which buildings they should be addressing first, what the key measures are, and what the paybacks associated with that are. So for any energy services companies on the line or anything like that, it's not like we're going to come and try and eat your lunch. It's more like we're just trying to like raise the topic with our clients in an intelligent way and provide them with a little bit of value, a little bit like a financial advisor might do, you know, to help get them thinking about energy efficiency, decarbonization, and the financial value it can provide.
Oh, that's perfect. There's a few questions in the Q&A just around kind of minimal funding amounts or smallest project sizes, things like that. Could you touch on those, maybe with an example if you got one? Or yeah, and Aaron, maybe I'll kick it to you first.
Sure. Yeah, generally speaking for us, I would say, because there are fixed costs involved in any agreement that we're entering into, including things like investor-ready energy efficiency certification, which is a requirement to deploy CIB funds as an aggregator, as well as legal closing fees and the audit costs and all of that jazz. I would say, generally speaking, it starts being a less compelling business case if we're looking at an investment that's under about $500,000. So the smallest investment that we've done, I think, to date is about 425 or 400,000, and that was because that particular owner of a student housing facility out east was more interested in preserving his equity and using us for that. And so rather than comparing us to kind of traditional debt, he was comparing us to what his equity could do for him elsewhere, right? And that again, with the mid-market players, tends to make a lot of sense when you position it like that. Well, if I'm preserving my leverage here and I've got more liquidity over there, well, I could go do this or I could go do that. So we don't necessarily compare apples to apples, as you're probably hearing, to more traditional kind of debt financing structures or debt structures. On the upper end, I would say, it doesn't even matter the upper end, because we could go as big as you'd like. We've got more money than we have projects for sure, and I'm sure James would say the same thing. But I would say our sweet spot for investment has tended to be between about $2 and $10 million on average.
Okay.
That's where most of our deals tend to fall.
Not too dissimilar to Aaron. Maybe I'd move up the kind of overall band a couple of notches upwards. So I'd say for us, below 2 million is going to start to get a little bit, you know, challenging, mainly because there's more work required on the client's part and more work required on our underwriter's part to deliver the kind of CIB, the eligibility requirements that CIB, you know, need to see, which is a substantiated kind of 50% decarbonization of that building. So I'd say the lower end would be, you know, practically speaking, $2 million probably. Now, if a client came to me and said, like, look, I want to do a retrofit that takes this dirty old building to a Canada Green building, net zero, you know, carbon building standard, like I would really lean in and try and, like, you know, roll up my sleeves and make a project like that work. But if it was like, you know, less ambitious than that, it might start to be a bit of a struggle under 2 million. As per Aaron, I'd say the sky's the limit in terms of, you know, larger than that. Sweet spot probably between more like 5 to 20 million or something would make sense. But look, I mentioned earlier in the call, we're looking at using solutions based off our own balance sheet to finance retrofits ourselves. That's something we're looking to introduce in this year, sorry. I think the key thing there is we won't be using CIB money, so there will not be any eligibility, or there won't be strict eligibility requirements. I think what we will be looking for there is offering slightly enhanced financing terms for green uses of proceeds that the client can prove using a cost consultant or quantity surveyor, and that would include kind of increased leverage and longer amortizations. But the idea is there's no CIB money, so you don't need to prove any level of decarbonization. We will effectively have a look at your receipt or have a look at your construction costs and say, yep, they're all in line with decarbonization. We'll give you enhanced financing terms. Now, I'm aware that we are sacrificing granularity over measurement and verification there. But as I think about this, I would much rather fund 10 electrification projects where I actually don't really have much of an idea of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions, as long as they include heat pumps, than, you know, get a really, really solid measurement and verification plan in place for one project that does include a heat pump, but it involves, you know, a lot of extra work. So for me, at least right now, I want fewer barriers to electrification rather than more. And if a really, really detailed measurement and verification plan is a barrier right now, I don't think we would necessarily require that for enhanced financing terms.
No, that's perfect. And yeah, the electrification as a main pathway to decarbonization makes a lot of sense. So how do we open that up? Maybe just one last question for each of you, and I'll start off with James on this one, but really just wondering, in your opinion, what can we collectively do to accelerate the pace of financing for commercial building retrofit activities?
What I'm trying to do is show other banks how it can be done. If I have my BMO hat on, obviously we want to be first, we want to be best, we want to be, the shiniest. That's fine. But like when I take my BMO hat off and think, as James, somebody who cares about the planet and not setting it on fire for my children, like I want other banks to do this. And you know what? That attitude is actually replicated by the head of our Canadian real estate group. I kind of asked him, can I speak to other banks about what we've done with CIB? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, we've done it first. We've got the credit. Now we need all of them to come along as well. So for me, like, I just want to continue kind of blazing a trail and trying to innovate as much as I can at BMO and showing other banks how it can be done, and then having us copy it, because ultimately I don't want a borrower to only have to go with BMO to do a really deep decarbonization project. I'd love if, proper market competition could function effectively and they could go to any bank to get financing structures. So we're trying to lead the way, but we want other banks to follow us.
Perfect. And Erin?
Yeah, I mean, building off of that, I think the one thing that we can do is just collaborate. I think that moving such a complex market in a short time span to enable these net zero emission targets for 2050 to actually be achieved is going to require a massive amount of coordinated public policy planning across all levels of government, and then a lot of action by the private sector as well as individuals, right? I think the magnitude of the cost required in terms of annual investments, which we know is in the tens of billions, or I mean, I think you quoted a number 6 billion before. Lots of reports that I read are definitely higher than that. And I mean, the current slow pace of change, and in particular, the fact that I continue to hear, after having great conversations with folks around moving to heat pumps, that they actually in the end went with a high efficiency fossil fuel boiler. That's locking in those emissions for decades, right? And so we need to be collaborating, we need to be educating. I don't think that governments and utilities are able to kind of shoulder this transition alone. There needs to be more investment from the private sector, and that's financial institutions and businesses, and there is lots of it out there. So there's lots of money out there. It's just about making that change and aligning mission and vision and values towards it, and making that concerted effort to actually move forward on that pathway towards net zero.
Yeah, and it's great to, I mean, it's been great to hear from you and to hear about how you're leading the charge on this from the financing sector point of view, right? And there's many other organizations as well that are similarly helping on this front. But yeah, it is going to be collective action at the end of the day that helps move the needle on this front, right? We all need to be working on this together, and I think most of the people on the call are probably likely quite engaged on this front. Perfect. I will share my screen one more time. I just wanted to do a quick quick outro, but thanking both Erin and James for spending the time with me today and having this conversation. I think it was great, and the Q&A was lighting up. We'll see if we might be able to answer a few questions offline as we circulate the deck to people who've been here, because there's a number that we weren't able to tackle. I wanted to flag that for anyone who hasn't become a partner for the Building Decarbonization Alliance already, please feel free to check out our website and sign up as a partner. Commitment is really that you're looking to be engaged in these types of discussions, and so it's relatively low commitment to join, but please do take a look there. And other than that, thank you so much. We'll include Erin and James's contact info when we send out a mailer, so please do feel free to reach out to them and pitch them a bunch of cool projects in this space, and we'll keep working on this together. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.